Okay. Hi, guys.
Hi.
Hello.
Okay, guys, let's start. Last 2-3 minutes, let's talk about your companies, and it should be like the small introductions. Let's start. Tom, what about you? Hi, Tom.
Thank you so much for having us, Manana. It's great to be here with you on this panel. Yeah, I'm Tom Duncan, the CEO of Earthbanc. We're a green digital banking and investment platform. At the moment, we have access to licenses that cover all of Europe for investment in securities and also blockchain-based assets as well. So we're very focused on impact investments, so renewables, health tech, a lot of work on carbon ecosystem restoration and large-scale carbon drawdown. So we're quite differentiated in that there's not enough impact investment platforms out there that bring everything into one place that give you digital bank accounts as well as investment accounts. It's really focused on ESG and impact.
Are you based in US?
So yes. So we have a US company, and we're in the process of negotiating with banks in the US to utilize their banking license infrastructure. And yeah, so we're actually in the process of. US takes a little bit longer. Europe has a lot of open banking laws that make it quite a bit easier to launch a digital bank. So we started there, and we just graduated from a central bank blockchain fintech sandbox in Europe. So that's why we can basically access all of the European market for digital banking and investment.
And what is the impact for your company? Because it's called like the climate finance company. What does it mean?
Right. Yeah. So we call ourselves a climate fintech bank, and or banking platform. And really, what that means is every interaction that you have with a bank account, a debit card, or your investments is measurable in terms of its impact on the climate, and not just the climate, but also ecosystems. As we know, climate is really supported by trees, forests, the oceans. So we're taking a very holistic view about impact. And so one of our first products that we launched is called the Grow Bond.
Mm-hmm. Like the green bond. Yeah, it's so amazing.
Now, Grow Bond was launched in 2019, delivers a yield of 6%. Yeah, it's a great product of impact. So yeah, our Grow Bond, apologies if it cuts a little bit in and out. Our Grow Bond, for every $100 invested, it sequesters 2 tons of carbon, and that draws down into mangrove forests. Now, mangrove forests, they're basically the spawning grounds of 50% of fish that live in the ocean are spawning in the mangrove forest. So if you restore mangroves, you're drawing down carbon, but you're also supporting oceans. And so this is what we mean by a holistic approach to impact investment. Oh, I'm having trouble.
Can't hear you, Manana.
Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, I want to introduce you to the friend of mine from Silicon Valley. They're amazing and powerful woman. And I want to talk about here like the venture capital firm and how it's worked for the impact investment. Radhika, please.
Hi, thanks, Manana. Great to be here. So I'm a founding partner of StarChain Ventures, and it's actually a venture studio. So we're really in the process of drumming up a bunch of companies, and we have a focus on certain areas like digital health or health tech in general, also fintech and supply chain logistics, that sort of area. I guess by way of background, just a little bit about myself. I'm a TEDx speaker, Silicon Valley woman of influence, and I'm also a member of the California GovOps blockchain working group, which advises, it's a task force that's advising California state legislature and Governor Gavin Newsom. So a lot of the work that I'm doing is at the intersection of various technologies. That's kind of the focus of our venture studio, is where we're bringing together advanced technologies like blockchain in conjunction with AI, ML, and IoT in its applications with various areas, such as especially digital health or health tech and supply chain logistics. There's a lot going on in that area. How are we impact focused? Well, I could just say that just from a philosophical perspective, we're very much along the lines of whatever we do has to be something about the greater good for the world, not just in our little microcosms. And certainly, you know, you can get really lost in this little big microcosm of Silicon Valley. But I think the perspective we have is very much global, and understanding that what you do does impact the world and does definitely go beyond whatever your local ecosystem is. And the work that I'm doing alongside the government side of things, or the policy side of things, it's not really government, but it's policy, and supporting California state legislature and the governor is really to help the legislature understand the impact of advanced technologies like blockchain. I published a book last year called Enterprise Blockchain Has Arrived, and that book really was about getting a comprehensive view of the applications of this technology in conjunction with other technologies like AI, ML, and IoT, and looking at various sectors. So we really looked at a broad range of sectors, not just in health IT or in supply chain logistics or fintech. We looked at the power and energy sector, for example. So there's some shared passions with Tom on that front, with my colleague who's a partner of mine. But there's also just in areas where we're recognizing that technology can be harnessed for the greater good in various sectors. And it's not just in the traditional, what people think about as impact investing, but there's ways to boost financial inclusion, for example, and blockchain and other associated technologies can be greatly utilized. So I'm on the board of one of the the advisory board of one of the companies that is doing some really great work in Africa, for example. Focused on financial inclusions and fintech payment side, and they're working with the Gates Foundation. So there's areas where you can really leverage technology to do things that are really impactful, and so that's kind of the focus that we have.
Radhika, thank you so much. And our next guest, Merri, friend of mine as well too, an amazing business angel, and one of the founders of V.C.fund. Please share with us what you think about impact investment, and give maybe some advices for the startups. Introduce yourself, please.
Well, to start, I thought 2020 would be the year of impact investing. I didn't know all the things we were in for, but I thought that the world would start understanding what we already know, which is that a lot of money is going to go in that direction for the good reasons, and for the reasons that people are smart enough to now understand when they're investing. Why not do two things at once? Take care of situations, people, countries, all kinds of issues and problems, and no longer call these things charity. Call it an investment where you might actually get a great return, but also let's take care of all the issues at hand. We have 17 SDGs. You can pick 1 or 5 if that's what your company is going to do, but I'm happy to look at any company that at least takes care of at least 1 SDG. You know, my personal goal is women. So I look to invest in companies that are run by women, built by women, as building my own, fund with other women. All women investors. 7% of investors in venture capital in the United States are only women. So we're looking to change that. So right there, that's an SDG on its own. Biotech, AI, AR, VR, and blockchain are the areas that we're familiar, that we love, that we're passionate about. And we're from several countries in the world. So That's what I'm excited about. And anything that will make a difference, anything that's positive is, I think, an important thing. And I think that the fact that we're all changing the way we're looking at investing, and like you said, the traditional, I think, investment was people were just buying into large companies, tech companies, as we've seen over the last decade, especially in the United States. Now we're looking at something parallel that will do these things, but instead of just maybe social media, it will take care of an issue, a problem. It will solve getting water maybe to people in Africa. It will help get rid of diseases. It will help increase jobs, all these different areas. And so I don't think there's anything really more important you can learn and understand than how to invest in a socially responsible way these days. It's part of business, but it's awesome. And I think the largest funds in the world are all understanding what we're talking about.
Okay, and my first question, what is the difference between the venture capital and sustainable investing and tech innovation for the good and impact investment? What is the difference between the social responsibility? And maybe it's look like the new emerging asset class for us or not.
So it depends on who what your commitment is, right? If my commitment is that no matter what company I invest in, it will be at least one of the SDGs, that's my commitment. Some people have nothing to do with it, right? I might have a fund from 4 years ago and we've never mentioned SDGs. So I think that has to do with what you're looking to invest in or might be in one sector. And obviously we're all tech. So as I'm sure you guys are, so that's our areas, but it's a commitment. And I think that that's where you're going to find a lot of money to be raised. I think that that's in the trillions of dollars. And that's our future because our whole planet has gotten together and agreed that we have these issues. In fact, obviously the UN did if we have 17 exact topics. So I guess that makes us somewhat responsible to put it towards at least one thing to help others. That's how I see it.
What is the best cases in impact investment? It's mostly about actually revenue for the investors.
There's a lot of different directions. If we wanted to just talk blockchain, we could talk about IBM and Walmart building one of the biggest blockchain projects there is, that they're going to trace perishables, drugs, and food on the block around the world, right? It took 4 years to build that. It's huge. So although they're doing this because they're big companies with a lot of money to make more money, it also does have a purpose and will truly help us all over the planet. We could talk about biotech, but again, we'd be solving people's health. We can go in and we were talking about renewables. We can go in and talk about how we get rid of waste on the planet. That's huge. That will probably affect the climate change. So we have every one of these, and then it depends where our passions are. And some of them are with young people and how to train them earlier and get them an education maybe in technology outside of their schooling so they can start learning earlier and get to work earlier and change even their own neighborhoods. It's important, but I don't think you can really do it anymore, invest without really hitting at least one SDG, to be honest.
I think I couldn't agree with you more, Merri, especially on the health side. I'm very passionate about that area because health is something we have from birth until death and beyond, maybe. I think, yesterday I'm a co-convener at TICON, which is a flagship conference here in Silicon Valley. And I happen to be on the board of that organization. And our opening keynote was with Dr. Deepak Chopra, who everybody knows around the world. And one of the questions that was asked of him is, what do you think about mental health? And he said, well, mental health is not mental health. It's just health, right? It's mind, body, spirit. And I looked at that statement and I'm thinking about really holistically what we need to be thinking about. And I think where we are in the use of technology to be able to solve really fundamental issues we have with health in general, with families that are affected because of that health. And there's a lot of ancillary kind of benefits and it just kind of ripples out. And so I couldn't agree with you more that if you pick one thing, like health, for example, it's just something that we hopefully enjoy from that is good, but if you look at the trend lines that are happening in that area, the things that I get excited about particularly are that here we are, we're investing trillions of dollars in this sector. Digital health has seen some of the biggest, amounts raised in that sector alone. But where's the impact? Where is the result? What is the ROI of all that we've put into that sector? And there's some amazing technology that is out there. And yet we have underlying issues, comorbidities, and so on, issues with lifestyle. Those are the social determinants of health types of issues. So if you really think about the broader perspective and pick one thing and really go after that and not only invest in that area, but help entrepreneurs bring up new companies in that area so that you can solve problems in a much more effective manner. I couldn't agree with you more. That's really great that you're focused as well in similar areas and that you're bringing about examples, for example, like IBM and Walmart, which is about food and it's about food safety as well. And that's another health issue, but we don't talk about those issues often enough.
Good point.
Tom?
There's a big intersection between food. Yeah, there's a really big intersection between food, mental health, and then also climate comes into the pictures there as well. We know food waste is one of the biggest source of emissions in many places in the world. So closing the loop and moving to a circular economy. So tech companies that are solving those problems are great impact investments as well. And we think more broadly, if we start to look at the way, how is food produced? Is it through sustainable regenerative farming? That's a huge area. There's some big companies making some pretty big bets. I mean, you may have seen Patagonia, for example, unicorn company, well known for their clothing, and now a food company. And there's a really good reason for that. It was interesting at the movement of people into the food and tech sector is, we've seen the rise of plant-based food products. But there's also the rise of regenerative organic meat is really quite interesting. If you look at a life cycle assessment of a regeneratively grazed animal versus some plant food products, you actually see some of the regenerative meat products have a better climate profile, which is just extraordinary. Whereas you look at a factory farm and it has the worst climate rating of all. So it's clear to see that things like factory farming, those industries are the industries of the past. Their life cycle will come to an end quite shortly, I'm predicting. And I think one of the reasons is in the era of a pandemic, and we've seen the crossover of diseases from animals into humans, obviously knowing what we know now of how it can grind an entire global economy to a halt, that the writing is on the walls for factory farms. So people won't be investing in them. They're investing in the alternatives, which is great to see. So next week, I'm on the board of a panel with the UN Convention to Combat Desertification. Now, and so that's the UNCCD. Now, they came out with a report that said if we invest just $300 billion, which we compare that to the recent stimulus package in a few countries alone, that would buy the planet potentially 15 to 25 years if we switched all of our food production to regenerative farming. So if you think about the impact of that, of just 300 billion, so we're going to be talking about that in a conference next week called the Co-Dialogue on Environment and Security, because climate is ultimately a security issue. If your climate is collapsing and you've got tens, maybe hundreds of millions of climate refugees, it's an insecure world. So people are starting to align to that a lot on military, or we could support more on climate action. And investments that align with that are going to be winning.
My next question about your forward-thinking investment strategy. If we talk about something like the competition between the finance, and what is like your social impact results? And maybe a little more about like the future of finance from the Tom and health wealth management and impact investment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. The future of impact investment and fund management, those who strip out non-ESG aspects from their portfolios, in this latest round of the big market crash, all of the ESG ETFs are beating the market. And so what that is telling us is that if your portfolio is not aligned to ESG with good environmental, social, and governance, you're not going to be winning. And also your social license to operate may indeed be removed, either by the people or the country you're operating in, or by the courts of law. So we're starting to see that if social license and environmental and governance are just so important. For example, banking the unbanked, that's a huge one. We've tried to tackle that in India. We started providing our software as a service for free to microfinance institutions because these banking the unbanked, they don't have a digital banking experience. So we've started providing that, and we now have 23,000 active daily borrowers in India using the Earthbanc platform. And we're probably about to increase to about 60,000 in the next few months. So what we're seeing there, like, there's a lot of people that fall between the gaps. And so what we're seeing from a banking, finance perspective, if you continue to let people fall through the gaps, people are not going to be happy. And so we think that from purely a utilitarian perspective, if you want to have a good economy and a happy society, you can't let people fall through the cracks. So banking and finance and impact investment is aligning around that concept as well. It's a whole of society approach. Don't let anyone fall between the cracks, whether it's financially, health-wise, and so on. So we think that's companies that get aligned and portfolio managers that get aligned with that are going to do well in the long run.
So Tom, I wanted to just jump in really quickly and just say that, finance is a really great area that illustrates that impact. I mentioned that I'm on the advisory board of a company that is doing some really great work in Africa. The founder is from Nairobi. And, if you look at the women of Africa, they are often the people that fall through the cracks because they don't have access to banking. They're not they're not in the financial ecosystem, if you will. They are not allowed to open bank accounts in many instances. And so you've got these women that are, trying to drum up businesses, have cottage craft industries type of business, trying to maintain their families, and they can't do that. They're not part of that financial economy, if you will. And so the ability to get beyond that banking system is really, really important. Obviously, in East Africa, we've already seen such great innovation with M-Pesa, for example, which is facilitating financial transactions on the mobile platform. But it goes well beyond that because, what if it's always tied to a bank account, but if you don't have a bank account, what do? You're still left out. And that means women continue to be the ones that fall through the cracks. And so the ability to get beyond that and to facilitate banking and payments in a whole new way, and to be able to do split payments, for example, which is what this company is doing. The company itself is called Social Media Gateways, but their platform is called AfroStash. And I couldn't be more proud of the work that they're doing with the Gates Foundation and with Google and other companies, because they recognize that entire, sections of the population, namely women, are falling through the cracks. And so I completely agree with you that from an impact perspective and for the finance perspective, there's a lot we can do, and investing ourselves and in those companies, in those areas is really going to lift the entire population up and families.
Good point. I'm assuming that you're talking about to get the unbanked bank that we're talking about digitally, digital wallets. And so I guess they need a lot of POS so they can go into stores and places and use our digital money. And so that's why I think many of us found Bitcoin many years ago, because we knew that solved those kinds of problems. There was a woman in Afghanistan 6-7 years ago who had a business, and she found out that all the women that worked for her, their husbands took their money. So she found Bitcoin and said, put this in your phone, and she used to pay them that way. She's a pretty well-known woman these days. So I'm sure we can take that example and move that to much larger areas, like you said, in Africa and other places where they're not banked. And I believe that's 1.7 billion people or something, right? So that is a huge area in itself. And you're right, that is an amazing investment that's global, that helps so many people. And so that's exactly, I think, what we're feeling is that the impact investment, it solves more than one thing, and you're going to probably make great money anyway. It's a great investment. Like I said, they used to call things charity. Today, you do impact investing, you can have an incredible return and make a difference in the world for many people,
Yeah,
right?
but it's not just the point of sale, that aspect of it. It's also, for example, this company Afterstash, what they're doing is really allowing people to do split payments, or allowing people to say, for example, you're an expat basically, or you're working, you're from that country, you're working abroad, you're trying to send money home or send money to people in your home country. Well, unfortunately, the money itself sometimes gets used up for other things than the things that it was intended for. So there's ways now that they are connecting it to you buying through stores, so that the goods get delivered rather than money getting delivered. So now you know that the money is actually being utilized to purchase the things that you're giving the money for it, right? So that opens up, that's a person to person kind of transaction. But imagine companies that can say, talking about the charitable thing to do, this is not really charity, but it's saying if you wanted to donate allocate a certain amount of money, and saying this should be used for certain purposes, now that can be leveraged on a corporate fashion as well. So you're really going to be enabling an entirely different way of having impact on the ground, and seeing that the money that is being invested is actually put, or money that is being given is actually being utilized for the purposes it was intended to be utilized for. So it's opening up some incredibly exciting avenues. And so this is the kind of thing that I'm talking about. So it's not just, I do agree with you that yes, you could think about Bitcoin or digital banking or that kind of thing, but you can think of other creative mechanisms that have as much impact from a financial perspective, and from the boots on the ground kind of perspective. So I think those are the things that are creatively coming up these days that are incredibly wonderful.
That sounds amazing, and that's something I haven't heard of yet. But we could apply that to almost any industry in the world.
Talk afterwards.
Guys,
Yeah.
guys, look at the unknown. Thank you for joining us, darling. This is a friend of mine, a founder of Women Investing in Women. And my question was about what is the impact investing for you? And what is the difference between tech innovation for good and sustainable investment? What is the difference? And maybe you explain what to do in your project and how it's like a help women.
Okay, thank you all for having me. I wasn't sure what to do. I had technical difficulties this morning. So great to see everyone. And Merri, hello. And Radhika, hello. And Tom, hello. Nice to see you all. And Manana, thanks for having me. So the difference between, I believe the question is the difference between tech for good and sustainability for good. Was that the first question?
Yes.
Okay. I feel like there's some kind of an overlap, honestly, like tech for good. Some of the tech that I've seen has actually been sustainable, but if you're saying sustainability, it may or may not necessarily involve tech. Like there's different types of innovations that are out there that are low tech or no tech, and they've been amazing. But I think what you're seeing now in this post-COVID environment, if that's what we're focusing on, which I believe everyone is at the moment, I'm seeing a lot of innovation that's actually addressing UN Sustainable Development Goals. So when we say tech for good and sustainability for good, that direction of finding solutions for UN SDGs, there's 17 of them. If you just pick one of them, whether it's hunger, no poverty, gender equality, health inclusion, financial inclusion, I think any of those, then it's definitely a combination of both. So I think the ones that are naturally going to survive this period that we're all in is likely going to be sustainability for good, if I was to focus on one or the other, just because resources are becoming more scarce. And I say this because, the world changed, the world has shifted. Even if we look at something as simple as travel, like airlines, like just think of the types of fuels they're using, or housing for that matter. We're looking into more solar powered options. And I think there is this whole shift of how do we conserve what we have, be it water, be it land, be it resources, and people are realizing, we're going from very little savings. Many people had very little savings to start with, and now they're going to end up in huge amounts of debt. So that's another huge crisis we're going to have to solve. So anything that makes us more sustainable, I think in this age of impact investing, I think are the types of investments, whether they be tech or non-tech. I think that's the direction we would head in. Women investing and women digital, we're a global media platform. And as you already know, we've got different types of initiatives that we work on. One is the Global Summit series, which we had before. We had private equity roundtables where women would learn how to invest, and also entrepreneurs would learn about access to capital. We shifted that into more action-oriented, where women were actually investing and entrepreneurs were actually raising capital at one point. And then we went in the direction of media content creation. Started off with video content, and then back in 2015, we started a Facebook group which had 500 followers. Group Facebook.com/Women Invest Now, 100,000 followers. From that, we created a podcast series called Women Investing and Women and Girls, produced by 16 to 23-year-old young women and girls. And that series had about 100 episodes. The youngest co-host was my daughter at the time. She was 2.5. The babysitter was our co-host, and the nanny was a producer. And we had Princess Rima of Saudi Arabia on air, the former Deputy Prime Minister of Sweden on air, the head of Intel Women and Girls. And we created this website, thestateofwomen.com, where we integrated all of our solutions from social media, our different events, our podcasts onto one platform, which is now building out to be the State of Women podcast network. We have, Merri, we haven't spoken since quarantine. We have 150 women-led podcasts that have signed on since I last talked to you. They're from all over the world, 5 different continents. We've got Oprah Winfrey's adopted daughter. She's coming on board on our team, which is super cool. And she has this incredible story. And she was originally from South Africa and came and studied in the US and went back to South Africa. So Mpumi is now on the team officially, and we're going to be co-hosting a podcast together. Another new podcast host is Sheikha Al-Thani, and she is from the royal family of Qatar. And we're going to be talking to women angel investors and women impact investors from the Middle East about their perspectives. So there's three other awesome ladies on this call today. Tom, you can come along as well. But each one of their stories is super awesome. And, when we build this dialogue with women investors around the world, I think that alone is going to have tremendous impact, because we inherently see the world through a different lens. Whether you agree or not, like there's a lot of innovation that goes underfunded. We all know the stats, less than 5% of women entrepreneurs. The reason, because, if women investors are not at the table, they're not getting funded as often. So I think during COVID, we're actually unleashing a lot of inherent potential and opportunities like what you're creating, Manana, like today, this having. We're definitely going to share it with our community, our social media following, wherever we can, because it's important that women are engaged in this conversation. And I think our platform, the State of Women Podcast Network, is going to do exactly that. We're going to enable women to start connecting more effectively through audio, because like today, I had problems connecting with video. And what do? You can actually listen to podcasts whenever you want. It also tells your story, so people know exactly what you're doing and why you're doing it. And I think with social media, there's a way to get your voice out there and amplify it in a much better way. And so I'm really looking forward to connecting with you, Radhika, after this call and learning more about your bank and how we can maybe collaborate on solutions. Tom and Merri, you and I have already spoken before, but we're doing pretty well during quarantine and the need for getting our voices heard. Thank you.
Yeah. Next time I'll bring our female co-founder on the call. She's she would love to be here as well. Yes.
Thank you so much. Yeah, and my next question about what is the difference between the technology entrepreneurs and impact entrepreneurs? And maybe you share with us a little bit more about insights for this year after the COVID, and what is the next we talk about trends in machine learning, in robots, maybe in green energy, education technologies, and health tech. And maybe how we can support these types of the entrepreneurs, because it's completely different. Sure. And completely different style of the fundraising.
I think you bring up some really great points. I mean, I think we've seen that this whole pandemic has forced us to rethink certain things, right? We're in a kind of this new world, right? Most everything is remote. Look at us, right? I think in some great benefits of that, it's bringing the world closer. I think access is driven up. I told you that I was a co-convener of a conference. Usually it's in person, it's like 4,000 or 5,000 people. Instead, we had them virtually, right? And so it brings greater reach, I think, to what we're doing. I think in terms of technology and where we're seeing how COVID has sort of changed the way we're doing things in health, for example, we're seeing some really great solutions on contact tracing, for example. Yesterday on a panel, there was a project out of MIT, which is protecting privacy platform. It's a privacy protecting contact tracing open source platform. And I think that that's really necessary, because if you think about how you're going to trace, you know, who you've been exposed to or who's been exposed by you, for example, and effectively do that without compromising something we hold dear, which is personal privacy, I think those are pretty necessary. We don't want this surveillance kind of mentality to infiltrate, if you will. So that's something that's very exciting. Another aspect is testing. So, you know, how do you prove that you've been tested? How do you know that the test is actually valid? So from a provider perspective, as well as from the person taking the test, how do you document that? So we're really talking about verifiable credentials in this case. And so verifiable credentials are a way for people to really be able to document that something has actually happened, that it's been issued by an authority, by an entity, by a body that actually is authorized to do so, that the results of that test are valid. Then if that test gets added to, say, your immunization record at some point, now we've got a vaccine. Who knows how long that'll take? People are trying to be optimistic and say it'll be happening within a year. Let's hope so. But in the meantime, however long that takes, that whole process of developing vaccines and being able to know that those vaccines that will eventually happen also have to have a way of getting added to your immunization record. We're talking about full spectrum kind of issue here in terms of what we need to come out of this from a technology perspective. So we're seeing that blockchain and open source based platforms are really coming about now and really changing the face of what we're doing in a post-COVID era. And it's not really going to be post-COVID. I think that's a misnomer. We're going to go through waves. We were even seeing it continue. So people are talking about, oh, we're coming out of lockdown. What does that mean, right? And areas that are coming out of lockdown are going back into lockdown because they're seeing an incidence of rise in cases or whatever. So I think technology is definitely going to play a role on the health side, from tracing to testing to any number of other areas that you can think about. From an impact area and where I think policy can really help. Some of the work that I'm doing alongside this blockchain task group, which we just finished our last stint. We started in September. We just finished our final report. It will be submitted to state legislature on or about July 1st. Is pretty comprehensive, and health records was one of the areas that I worked on. And it was this is an area where we're going to be planning pilots now in the next phase, saying how do we partner with entities to be able to provide the right kinds of infrastructure or mechanisms or projects that we can support that will benefit the residents of California in this case. So I think from a government standpoint, there's a role from a policy perspective. How do we have the right frameworks and policies and legislation to support the innovation and to support? So it's not just about developing technology-based solutions that solve certain things. How do you provide the right policy frameworks? How do you incentivize those kinds of projects to actually come to fruition and not stilt innovation in the process? So there's a broad range of things that we can talk about in this COVID era.
Awesome to hear that you brought up the privacy side, because that was the side that was sort of making me wonder, how are we going to do this? Because you know that these apps are already being made as we speak. We will have them very shortly. They've already had them in Asia. And so I feel if they're going to track you to an nth degree and you do lose privacy, we're going to have a lot of issues. So that's awesome.
Happy to connect you with the MIT project.
Sounds very exciting.
Are you working with MIT Solve, or is it something separate?
This project, it's called Safe Paths. The CEO is Ramesh Raskar, and out of MIT, and so I'm not sure if that's the same thing that you're referring to.
Okay, MIT Solve was another initiative. It just happened. It's definitely not the same one. Now that you clarified. With regards to what we're working on with the State of Women Podcast Network app, we've got artificial intelligence and machine learning built in. It's already been coded. And the way that our app functions, I know, Merri, this happened in like 90 days in India. Only in India can you come up with something like this on the fly, right? So basically we have Google Flutter on the front end. So now we've got Android, iOS, we've got like both mobile pathways. Like if people can't afford iOS and Apple phones, they can use their Android phones. And on the back end, the way that they've coded it is there's a guest login or a Google login. So let's say, for instance, I don't want to give my identity. I don't want to give my information away. There's a way to still get sociographic data, demographic data, geographic data. And we can see who's actually accessing our content. And let's say it's COVID related content or breast cancer related content or serve for that matter. There's a lot of that women suffer from where there are vaccines and they just don't get the information. So what we're on our way to doing now is trying to get the information out there to people that need it. As we've all seen, like information is the difference between life and death in certain scenarios. And you have these migrant populations or refugee populations that don't get the information, they're at risk. So at the end of the day, if they're at risk, we're all at risk, because this isn't going to go away unless we start to address health for all and education for all. So with that in mind, how are we going to communicate with these people that are illiterate? We're going to do that through conversational artificial intelligence. So using a Siri functionality, these women can speak into their phone and get this content, and we can even localize it according to their languages. And in places like India, as you know, there are thousands of dialects. And so even if we all speak in English, what do we do for the people that don't? Now, what that does is opens up a whole nother opportunity, because traditionally influencers left unheard or left heard, some information is lost or it doesn't reach the people we're intended to. So these people are now given a platform, number one, to get their voice heard. It can be a micro entrepreneurial initiative where these women can make money off of what they're working on. And thirdly, we've got the data, which we haven't had before. And this is where it gets really cool, because initiatives like from organizations like the World Health Organization, for instance, they want to put programs out there. Like even if they do come out with a vaccine, what good is it if the people don't get the information to know that this is why they need it and this is what it's for? So ultimately, once we're able to get access to these demographics and these sociographics, and know exactly.
Yeah.
Might have cut out there. Just talking, if it looks like it's cut out, on AI, Earthbank, we're doing quite a lot with AI and machine learning. And particularly right now, we're probably the first digital banking and investment platform that is also a space tech company. Now, what does that mean? What does it mean to be a space tech company? So we recently got accepted into the European Space Agency Tech Incubator, where to become a space tech company, you have to have a few criteria that you need to meet. And one of the ones we're meeting is that we're analyzing satellite imagery and doing remote sensing. Now, why would a green digital bank and investment platform want to get involved in satellites and remote sensing? The answer is that you can base a lot of products using satellites and remote sensing. So what we've done with the Grow Bond, which we issued in 2019, it's got the 6% yield, quarterly payout. So it's got a great, impact investment kind of profile for a regular fixed income kind of product. Now, how we're using machine learning and AI is to actually analyze the forests that are being protected and the carbon that is being, carbon credits that are being issued. And then we're able to issue carbon micropayments to the people on the ground and the communities who are actually protecting those forests. So in India, so just talking about India again, which Dana was talking about. In the southern India, we've got the Sundarbans, where it's the largest mangrove ecosystem on the planet. And some of them, in fact, thousands of them, are now actively protecting forests and getting paid carbon to protect that. And that's all part of our Grow Bond product. So when you can create a new financial product that is driven by machine learning, AI, and remote sensing, you're getting to a whole nother level where, the financial system can make better decisions based on this sort of data. And I think we're moving to that sort of world. So in Europe, they've got the EU Green New Deal, which is 1.75 trillion now for the green recovery. So it's called green recovery. So post, right now, from going forward now, till 2030, they're going to spend 1.75 trillion. And a lot of that is going to flow into ecosystems protection, carbon protection, and becoming completely climate neutral by 2050. So you imagine that's 440 million people that are going to be climate neutral by 2050. That's a lot of investment. And it's going to be driven by AI and machine learning algorithms that platforms like ours are developing to drive investment into nature-based solutions to draw down climate. And we're firmly of the opinion, if you really want to achieve, they have to look at nature-based solutions. There literally is no other way. You could build batteries for every energy system around the planet. Every grid could install, 90%, battery storage, and you're still not going to reach, you're not going to get back to 350 ppm. You're just not. You're not even going to reach 1.5 degree limit globally. So if you want to actually achieve climate goals and not have runaway climate, you need to invest in nature-based solutions. And that means satellite, remote sensing, automation of the verification of carbon, and it means carbon markets as well, and tying financial systems to carbon markets, hence Earthbanc. So you can literally banking for the earth. That's what we think the future looks like. It's very smart, data-driven.
It's amazing stuff that you're talking about. And I think that the large corporations that have, the billions of dollars have a responsibility to invest in projects like this. And I think not only do they do that, but then they like to show you, whether they put it in a brochure, their company, their website, they like to brag that they are investing in these impact projects, companies to make a change on the world for one or many more reasons. So it's really heading in the right direction. I'm seeing it more and more. We've seen it on Wall Street. We've seen all these things that people are saying. And so it's all changing literally right now. I think that's also what you were just talking about. Huge, huge difference, right? 2050, but still.
Totally, yeah.
Climate is the health of the world.
Yes, that's right. And it comes back to like the
planet.
lockdowns we've experienced is nothing compared to what climate change is bringing to us. You know, if we don't act now and decisively, the lockdowns, our global economy is going to experience supply chain shocks, you know, more hurricanes, more storm surges, more floods, more fires. You know, that sort of lockdown that this world is not prepared for. And so we need to align our investments with that and planetary health.
It's vicious. It all feeds into each other.
Yeah.
Yeah, and next question, the last question. What do you think? How can the government solve the global problems like faster? And what is like the good and great cases for impact investment? Maybe people or companies. Like share with us, please.
I'll take a swipe at that. I mean, I'm speaking more locally or regionally here for California, but you know, I think that the initiatives we're taking with the task force, the blockchain working group that I'm a part of, I think that's a really important endeavor, because it's really meant to open doors. It's meant to educate the state legislature on how these things work. What are the low-hanging fruits of opportunity that they can create the right frameworks and legislations and policies around to facilitate and spur innovation in those areas? How do you create the right pathways of connection to the private sector or even the research sector, so that you can bring ecosystems together to create partnerships, public and private, to bring about the next generation of solutions that are going to facilitate an entire state? So these are the kinds of things that we've been talking about for the last several months, and coming out with this first initial report. You can watch for that on my LinkedIn page when I'm allowed to. It's under embargo right now, but once it's published, you'll see the full report and what kinds of things we were thinking about. But I think that just, you know, in terms of a sneak preview, this is the first step in the right direction. So the reason I bring this up is that when you said, what can governments do? I think a lot. Governments can actually get involved at the grassroots level, easing the way for companies to be able to do business, for the right kinds of businesses to come about, creating the right pathways for partnerships to be able to be forged from the public and private areas, so that we harness all of that energy and creativity and technology, right? I think technology is a great enabler. The question is, how do we go about harnessing it? And the question is, how do we go about facilitating the right policies that support that? Because if you've got a really heavy regulatory environment, and now you're trying as a startup to innovate, or a corporate entity to innovate, and you're saying, well, I can't do this because there's this regulation that prevents me from executing with the speed at which I'd love to execute, that's an impasse of sorts. And so I think that from the role of government, we see that good government has good policies and good legislation that can actually help rather than hinder. And we see that from, you know, administration to administration. There are changes that come about. So what do we do from a succession planning perspective, looking at how that partnership with government is so important right from the get-go? And so I think I'm pretty proud that the state of California is taking a very forward-looking position in this, and that there is already legislation that is being planned to really take care of this. The whole verifiable credentials thing that I was bringing about is part of AB 2004, and that's a bill that the state assemblyman Ian Calderon, who is a member of our group, has been a part of. So I mean, I couldn't be more proud that members of our group are really already spurring the right kinds of legislation, thinking about issues not only that affect us today in the current pandemic environment, but as we come out of it, what do we do afterwards, right? How do we preserve the interests of communities and societies and make sure that the underserved are also not forgotten?
Well said.
Merri?
I love everything that she said, but you know, California here in the United States is a very big tech state. So of course they're ahead probably than many other states. Hopefully there are others following. But what about the rest of the world? Perhaps they should each take on a responsibility. We should come up with a list globally, working together, of all the issues that we need to start solving and building these companies to solve, and then dividing up who should be the best to work on it. Because if we all start working on the same issue, we might be wasting time and money when one's going to come up with the best one because they've already built it halfway, let's say. So if we connect and communicate better, we can maybe, decide who should work on what based on what they've already started, based on the people that are there, that, we could all give money, let's say, together to work on them, but we should all come in from different sides and work on all our different issues. And there are 17 SDGs, but we need to make sure we're covering all of them and we're not sort of imbalanced there. So yeah, healthcare is huge, and all of these things, probably pretty much all of them affect it, but we need to make sure we're not missing any and neglecting any, and that a government that has less money to spend is working on a problem and we're not supporting them. So somehow we need to all connect, and maybe that can be something we could work on for the second half of this year, even. How to make sure that all of the issues we think at hand are all being addressed and all being funded properly all over the world.
Well, access, I think, is a big part of that. I mean, we've seen just in whether it's healthcare, whether it's climate change. I mean, we're talking about political will here and easing access to the right community. So it's not just the few at the top that get access to certain things just because of privilege, but it's really opening it up to the masses. So when I think about healthcare, one of the points that really hit home for me on that health panel that I was listening in on yesterday was talking about health being a grassroots, bottoms up kind of movement that is necessary, not just a top down. So even when we think about health solutions or climate change solutions or what have you, a lot of it can be hampered by regulatory, roadblocks. In health, for example, in the US, one of the biggest hindrances is you've got to have CPT codes for everything. It's got to all be tied to a reimbursement mechanism. And so that hinders things from actually being able to be used, right? Even with things like telehealth solutions, you've got, for example, issues that, well, what about the CPT code that is attached to that telehealth conversation? Not considering the fact that there's a need for that telehealth conversation to happen in the first place, right? So even as we're trying to use solutions that already exist out there, from a government standpoint, from a regulatory body standpoint, I think there's a lot that we can do to say, wow, maybe we ought to ease up on some of that or find a different way to create it so that we're not, putting another roadblock where that innovation should happen or where that solution can actually be used to create the right kind of impact for a community that doesn't have access any other way.
That's a great point. So COVID, which is a horrible thing, but it has brought that out. Those CPT codes instantly went boom. You get on telemed, use the code. Don't worry, instantly everything changed, right? All of those medical rules that would have been there have been instantly changed because we can use Zoom or any other form of audio, and doctors can instantly do their telemed. They didn't have to get all these approvals and use all these fancy apps that were being built for them. And that's what we had to do in emergency situations. So it just showed us that it was for good, that it works, and that we've solved one issue, is that people couldn't leave their homes and now they could all communicate with their doctors. And if we can do that, you're right. Why can't we do that in other forms of health? And why do we have to be so strongly regulated? I assume, like, if we're going to have our conversation, we just need our privacy. But other than that, you're right. Why can't we change things and change?
Well, it's good regulation. I just qualified. It's not like regulation is not necessary. It is necessary because regulation is there to protect the safety of communities, of countries, for example. So there's many issues why it's needed, but I think good policy is necessary. One that doesn't become onerous and stifle what you're trying to actually achieve through that. And I think, there was a joke that I saw a while back on LinkedIn, which is, who is the innovator in your organization? Is it the CEO? Is it the CTO? And the answer is COVID.
That's a good one.
Very good.
Yeah, I've seen that. That's so true. It forces you to innovate. You've got to. And talking about innovation, we set up Earthbank. Where's the first? Wanted it to be USA. We really did. But to be honest, I've got to say, Europe is really charging ahead on digital innovation. I think USA is losing its edge. I've got to say, I think, it's built some of the biggest tech companies in the world, but, the support, when you set up we do now have a US company, I should say. Okay, so we're definitely in the US, but first, Europe made it so attractive. It's like we could get access to the central bank, to a blockchain fintech sandbox. We could get personalized advice on this is how you should build your startup. Here's some tech suggestions. We'll give you access to the entire, one license to access 440 million. I mean, it tells you basically there's a big stop sign in the US that says, if you're a small up and coming tech company, this is not for you. We're for the big companies. So I think whereas Europe is more supportive, you're a small company, we want to support you and help you grow up. And I think that's a different mentality for me that, from a regulatory perspective about licensing, that's a huge one. Another one I think is, we got venture backing. Our first venture backing was from the European Institute for Innovation and Technology. Now, they essentially co-75 trillion. So the fact that they would back us and also co-architect something like a green recovery deal, that to me says there's a really good level of coordination on policy and innovation. So I really do think that Europe has got something here. They're very focused on digital transformation economy-wide. So I think there's a few lessons to it. So I would say, hey, USA, you got to check this out because they make it very encouraging as a fintech startup to start up there.
This is back to Merri's point, which is that as a global community, I think we have an opportunity here to put our differences aside and to really come through and learn from one another. So if one ecosystem is doing something that's handling things in a particularly effective way, look at New Zealand and the brilliant leadership under Jacinda Ardern. I'm such a very big fan of hers. I just think that the way she's approached this with putting empathy first and leading with empathy, so I think that there's things that we can learn from other ecosystems, that we can learn from one another. And I think there is no one silver bullet of leadership in any one ecosystem. Each ecosystem struggles on any number of given things. We can learn from one another. We can innovate but that takes mindset. That takes a flexible mindset. And I think this is where the whole government structural sort of thing comes about. It happens to be dependent on whatever regime is in place, whatever administration is in effect, and there's an ebb and tide to that. Certain regimes or administrations are more pro this way or pro that way, and that can either ease or stifle or whatever, right? There's a push and pull. And so, but I think that there's an opportunity from a global perspective. And this is why, when we're talking about SDG and ESG and so on, we're really thinking at a much different level. We're thinking at a planetary level, and we're thinking about global communities rather than just these little communities, right? We can start from the local communities, but we really have to think much more globally, I think.
Yeah, that's right. I think that if we can get global coordination at a planetary level around things like climate, I think that can be a real source of innovation and funding to really kickstart the economies globally. It's a huge opportunity. It's kind of a once in a multi-decade opportunity we have right now to say, let's create a green recovery, and for that to be a huge source of social and environmental and technology innovation.
I also think that you need to connect these people creating these companies and coming up with problems and solutions instead of governments. These people should be out there meeting, discussing, working on, and running these companies. And then you go back to your country's government and say, we need funding for this. This is what we're best at. This is what we're building. This is what we're doing for the rest of the world. And these are what they're doing. So we need our money. And then any country that was short on money, the other countries maybe would come together and help. But if you just leave it in hands of government, it's going to move, in my opinion, way too slow. They don't understand enough of the technology. They're not really going to understand what it is we need to build. So I think we need to sort of shift the who's in charge here and move it to the people that do understand it, and then have a connector into the government and the funding. So, and if the governments don't come up with enough, that's where you will see the private funding, and that's the funding for impact.
Science unites.
Mm. We all love our science.
Yeah. Science unites.
Everything is always exciting, new, changing, growing, solving, fixing.
With the new language of truth, isn't it?
Yeah.
You can't deny science.
We love, yes, especially immutable.
True.
Solve problems.
Okay, guys. Thank you so much. Thank you, Merri, Tom, Radhika.
Thank you, Manana.
Yes.
Thank you, Manana.
Great to be with you, Merri. And great to see you again, Tom.
Yeah, see you next time. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you for your time and this really great conversation.
Nice.
Bye-bye.
Bye.